In the shadowed vaults of eternity, where prophecies whisper like frost on ancient stone, a single drop of blood can unravel kingdoms forged in night. Ilara's veins burned with the curse of her birth, a half-life strung between the pulse of mortality and the endless hunger of the undead. Born in the fog-shrouded ruins of a forgotten Carpathian village, she was 28 now, her body a fragile vessel scarred by rejection. Her mother, a mortal healer, had loved a vampire wanderer who vanished before the first cry shattered the night, leaving Ilara to the villagers' torches and whispers of abomination. Abandoned at 16, when her fangs emerged under the full moon, she had wandered Europe's war-torn fringes, surviving on stolen blood and the illusion of humanity. Disillusioned by lovers who fled her touch and healers who branded her a demon, Ilara sought solace in the crumbling spires of the Black Citadel, the heart of the vampire clans. She was broken, her skin pale as moonlight, her eyes a stormy gray that hid the ache of isolation. Yet beneath it all burned a desire for belonging, for a love that could mend the fracture in her soul without consuming it. The citadel loomed like a jagged crown against the perpetual twilight, its towers piercing the veil of mist that clung to the mountains. Rain lashed the ancient walls, drumming a relentless rhythm against the leaded glass windows, while inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and flickering beeswax. Ilara slipped through the grand hall's arched doors, her boots echoing softly on the worn marble floor. Candelabras cast trembling pools of golden light, illuminating tapestries frayed by centuries, their threads depicting battles where immortals clashed with mortals in sprays of crimson. She pulled her hooded cloak tighter, the wool rough against her chilled skin, concealing the silver locket at her throat, a relic from her mother, etched with a rose in eternal bloom, its petals a symbol of fragile beauty defying decay. The council chamber awaited beyond, a sanctum of velvet-draped thrones and obsidian tables where the clans convened. Whispers had drawn her here, rumors of the oracle's vision, a prophecy that foretold doom woven from forbidden union. Ilara's heart, still beating, unlike the cold eternals around her, quickened. She was Dhampir, neither fully alive nor damned, and in this realm of shadows, such liminality was both curse and key. At the chamber's heart sat Victor, the vampire king, his presence a gravitational force that bent the air itself. Eternal at over a millennium, he ruled from the throne carved from petrified oak, its surface veined like exposed arteries. Born in the blood-soaked fields of medieval Bohemia during a war that claimed his mortal family, Victor had been turned by a rival lord in a bid for loyalty that soured into betrayal. He carried the guilt like a shroud, the wife he watched wither, the children he could not save, the endless nights of solitary command where mercy warred with necessity. Ethical to a fault, he forbade the turning of innocence, enforced fragile truces with human realms, and wandered the citadel's libraries in solitude, poring over tomes of forgotten lore. His eyes, a piercing amber, held the weight of empires risen and fallen. His skin, pale as marble, bore a faint scar across his palm from a vow sworn in youth. Solitary by choice, he desired redemption, not through power, but through a connection that might thaw the ice in his veins. Yet the oracle's words haunted him. Their love would shatter the kingdom he had bled to unite. The chamber buzzed with the assembled clans, shadowy figures in brocaded robes, their faces gaunt masks of immortality. Low murmurs rose like distant thunder, the scent of aged wine and iron-laced breath mingling with the rain's petrichor seeping through cracks. Ilara entered, her steps measured, feeling the weight of their gazes like needles on her skin. Victor rose from his throne, his movements fluid as smoke, the black velvet of his coat whispering against the stone. "Dhampir," he intoned, his voice a deep timbre that resonated through her bones, carrying the echo of forgotten symphonies. You come before us unbidden, yet the stars align with your shadow. She met his eyes, a spark igniting in the space between them. Resisted, rationalized as mere curiosity, yet inevitable as the tide. The prophecy calls me, my lord, Alara replied, her words steady despite the tremor in her chest. It speaks of destruction born from affinity. I seek truth, not alliance. Her fingers brushed the locket, the roses engraving a talisman against the pull she felt, the warmth of his gaze stirring something dormant, a hunger not for blood but for understanding. Victor's expression flickered, a shadow of guilt crossing his features. He had seen the oracle's vision in the scrying pool, her face marked by his hand, igniting war among the clans. The political fractures were already forming, rival lords plotting in the undercrofts, whispering of weakness in a king who entertained a half-breed. Truth is a blade that cuts both ways, he said, descending the dais. The room hushed, breaths held in unison, the only sound the patter of rain and the distant howl of wind through the battlements. He extended his hand, palm up, revealing the scar that mirrored her own hidden wounds. The oracle decreed our paths entwine, but choice remains. Swear fealty to no side, and perhaps we defy the stars. Alara hesitated, the air thickening with unspoken tension. The clans leaned forward, their eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. She placed her hand in his, cool flesh meeting the faint warmth of her half-life. A jolt passed between them, electric and profound, visions flashing unbidden, shared nights in ruined gardens, battles where loyalty fractured thrones, a love that redeemed yet doomed. The rose locket warmed against her skin, its petals seeming to pulse with forbidden life. In that moment, Victor drew a ritual dagger from his belt, its blade etched with runes that glowed faintly red. The chamber fell silent as death itself, the invisible specter hovering at every threshold. Before these witnesses, he declared, his voice laced with the gravity of centuries, I mark you as ally, not thrall. The blade pricked her palm, a sharp bloom of pain that drew a single bead of blood, crimson against her pallor, textured like velvet tearing. He pressed his scarred palm to hers, mingling their essence in a bond that hummed with power and peril. Gasps rippled through the assembly. A rival clan's elder rose, fangs bared. Blasphemy. The prophecy unfolds. The kingdom crumbles for a Dhampir's touch. Alara pulled back, blood dripping onto the stone, staining it like spilled wine. Victor's eyes locked on hers, a silent plea amid the rising chaos. Was this redemption or the first fracture? The rain intensified, thunder cracking like a breaking vow as shadows lengthened and the first whispers of betrayal stirred in the gloom. But in her veins, the mark burned not with curse, but with a question that clawed at her soul. Could she walk away from the one gaze that saw her whole, even as it threatened to unmake the world? The chamber erupted in a cacophony of silk rustling and fangs hissing, the air thickening like congealing blood under the weight of fractured loyalties. Ilara's palm throbbed where Victor's mark had seared into her skin, a crimson sigil that pulsed in rhythm with her unsteady heart, a half-beat echoing the full silence of the immortals around her. The rose locket at her throat felt heavier now, its etched petals pressing into her flesh like a warning, a fragile bloom caught in the storm of eternity. She withdrew her hand slowly, the mingled blood trailing in viscous threads between their fingers, staining the obsidian table like ink from a forbidden quill. The scent of it, metallic, warm, alive, cut through the chamber's musty veil of aged velvet and smoldering incense, drawing predatory glances from the assembled clans. Victor stood unmoved, his amber eyes fixed on the rival elder who had risen, a gaunt figure named Draven, his robes the color of bruised plums, embroidered with the silver thorns of House Morvath. Draven's face twisted in contempt, lips curling back to reveal canines elongated by centuries of unchecked ambition. You invite ruin upon us all. Victor, he snarled, his voice a gravelly echo that scraped against the vaulted ceiling like claws on stone. The oracle's words are not whispers to be ignored. They are chains forged in the fires of fate. Marking a Dhampir? Before the full council? This is no alliance. It is the spark that ignites our downfall. Murmurs swelled into a tide, shadows shifting as lesser lords leaned in, their eyes glinting with the cold calculation of those who had long outlived their consciences. Ilara's breath came shallow, the rain outside now a relentless tattoo against the leaded panes, blurring the world beyond into a watercolor of grays and silvers. She felt exposed, her cloak no shield against the scrutiny that peeled back her layers, the orphan's scars, the wanderer's weariness, the Dhampir's eternal in-between. Why had she not fled when the whispers first reached her in the mountain passes? Rationalization had kept her rooted. Curiosity, a desperate bid for purpose amid the ruins of her life. But now, with Victor's blood humming in her veins like a distant melody, resistance frayed at the edges. His touch had been cool, deliberate, yet it stirred a warmth she had not known since her mother's lullabies, a treacherous pull toward the very damnation the prophecy foretold. Victor raised a hand, silencing the chamber with the authority of one who had quelled wars with a glance. The candelabras flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the tapestries, where embroidered immortals waged eternal battles in threads of gold and scarlet. The oracle speaks of destruction born from love, he said, his timbre low and resonant, weaving through the tension like smoke from a dying fire. But love is not our chain. It is the blade we wield against despair. Ilara stands not as enemy, but as bridge. Her blood, half mortal, reminds us of what we have forsaken, the fragility that once made us whole. His words hung in the air, laced with the guilt that shadowed his every decree. He turned to her then, his gaze a private anchor amid the storm, revealing the solitude etched into his features. The king who commanded legions, yet confided in none, haunted by the family lost to plague and blade in Bohemia's bloodied fields. Draven laughed, a hollow sound that reverberated off the stone like cracking ice. Poetic delusions from a throne grown soft. The clans fracture already. House Morvath withdraws its fealty if this. Hybrid remains unbound. He gestured sharply, and two of his kin stepped forward, their movements fluid, predatory, the air around them sharpening with the faint ozone of impending violence. The council stirred, alliances shifting like sand underfoot. Whispers of betrayal slithered through the gloom, tales of undercroft meetings where poisons were brewed and daggers honed. Ilara's instincts flared. Her fangs ached faintly, a reminder of the hunger she suppressed with stolen sips from shadowed vials. But she held still, the mark on her palm burning as if alive, urging her toward Victor even as fear clawed at her resolve. In the hush that followed, Victor descended the dais fully, his boots whispering over the marble in a cadence that matched the slowing patter of rain. He stopped before Ilara, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of him. Aged leather, faint myrrh from his solitary rituals, and beneath it, the iron tang of restrained eternity. Choice is the only immortality we truly possess, he murmured, for her ears alone, his breath a cool caress against her temple. Walk from this, Ilara, and the prophecy sleeps. Stay, and we forge our own path through the thorns. His scarred palm hovered near hers, not touching, yet the space between crackled with unspoken possibility, a redemption he craved as fiercely as she did belonging. Two fractured souls orbiting the abyss. She searched his eyes, stormy gray meeting amber depths that held the ruins of 1,000 sunrises he could never reclaim. The locket warmed again, its rose a symbol mocking her fragility. In its petals, she saw her mother's face, fading like mist at dawn, and the lovers who had recoiled from her touch, branding her monster. Here, In this king's gaze, she glimpsed acceptance, not pity, but recognition of the shadows they both carried. Yet the chamber's tension coiled tighter, Draven's followers edging closer, their shadows merging into an encroaching darkness. The death that lingered invisibly at every corner seemed to lean in, its presence a chill draft through the cracks, whispering of battles yet to come, of kingdoms crumbling under the weight of forbidden affinity. Ilara's voice emerged soft, threaded with the ache of her divided blood. If love destroys, what mercy lies in denial? The words escaped unbidden, a confession that hung between them, raw and inevitable. Victor's expression softened, a flicker of something profound, guilt yielding to hope, crossing his features. But before he could respond, Draven lunged, a blur of velvet and venom, his dagger flashing in the candlelight toward Ilara's unmarked hand. Victor intercepted, his body a shield of unyielding grace, the blade glancing off his arm in a spray of dark ichor that sizzled on the stone. Chaos bloomed fully then, clans rising in uproar, shouts mingling with the thunder's roar, the air alive with the texture of tearing fabric and splintering wood as thrones toppled. Ilara staggered back, heart pounding a frantic dirge, the mark searing as if protesting the violence it had unwittingly unleashed. In the fray, Victor's eyes found hers across the melee, a silent vow amid the shadows. This was no end, but the beginning of their shared curse. As guards surged forward to restrain Draven, Ilara slipped toward the chamber's edge, the rain's chill seeping through the walls like doubt into her soul. The prophecy's weight pressed upon her, love as the kingdom's undoing, yet the only light piercing her endless night. Could she sever this bond before it consumed them both? Or would the pull prove stronger than the stars themselves decreed? The rose locket swung like a pendulum, its petals whispering of choices yet unmade, as the citadel trembled with the first tremors of war. The citadel's corridors twisted like veins beneath the skin of the mountain, their stone walls slick with condensation from the ceaseless rain that wept through unseen fissures. Ilara fled the chamber's uproar, her boots slipping on the uneven flags, each step a jolt that echoed the pounding in her chest, a fragile rhythm mocking the immortal's eternal hush. The mark on her palm throbbed, a living ember woven from Victor's blood, its heat seeping into her bones like forbidden wine, stirring visions that blurred the line between memory and desire. She pressed her hand to her side, the mingled crimson staining her cloak's wool in dark blooms, the scent of it sharp and intimate, mingling with the damp earthiness of the underpassages. Behind her, the clamor faded into muffled thunder, shouts of allegiance and accusation, the clash of steel on stone as guards wrestled Draven's kin into submission. But the fracture had begun, a hairline crack in the kingdom's foundation, born from her touch. She sought refuge in the forgotten wing of the library, a labyrinth of towering shelves bowed under the weight of leather-bound tomes, their spines cracked like aged flesh. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, piercing the narrow lancet windows, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the Persian rugs, frayed and wine-stained from centuries of solitary vigils. Ilara sank onto a velvet chaise, its fabric cool and yielding against her fevered skin, the rose locket slipping from her collar to rest heavy on her breast. She traced its petals with trembling fingers, the engraving rough under her touch, a talisman of her mother's fleeting warmth. Gone now, like the village that had cast her out, like the lovers who had tasted her half-life and recoiled in horror. Disillusionment wrapped around her like the fog outside, thick and suffocating. She had come seeking truth, not this maelstrom of loyalty and longing that now coursed through her veins. The door creaked open, a low groan of oak on iron admitting Victor. He moved with the quiet grace of one who had learned to tread lightly on the graves of empires, his coat trailing shadows like a raven's wing. Blood, his own, dark and viscous, stained the cuff of his sleeve where Draven's dagger had grazed him, the wound already knitting with unnatural speed, leaving only a faint gleam of ichor that caught the candle's flicker. He carried a silver tray bearing a crystal decanter of deep red liquid and 2 goblets, the glass etched with thorny vines that mirrored the tension etching his features. "The council disperses," he said, his voice a velvet murmur that cut through the library's hush, resonant as the distant drip of water from the rafters. "Draven is confined," but whispers spread like plague through the undercrofts. "Alliances teeter on the edge of your mark." Elara lifted her gaze, stormy gray eyes meeting his amber ones, the air between them humming with the residue of their bond. A subtle vibration, like the string of a lute plucked in the void. She resisted the pull, rationalizing it as the mark's sorcery, a chemical echo of blood mingling with blood. Yet inevitability clung to it, a tide eroding her defenses. "My mark," she echoed, her tone laced with bitter irony, the words tasting of ash on her tongue. "You placed it there, knowing the oracle's decree. Was it mercy, or merely the king's folly to defy the stars?" Her voice cracked, revealing the fracture in her soul, the Dhampir's eternal exile, abandoned by mortals for her fangs, shunned by eternals for her pulse. She desired belonging, a love that could stitch her wounds without unraveling her humanity. But this was a curse disguised as redemption. Victor set the tray on a nearby reading table, the goblets clinking softly, a sound like fragile bones settling. He poured the liquid, blood, warmed and laced with herbs to mimic life's fleeting heat, and offered her a goblet, his scarred palm upturned in silent invitation. The library's air grew thicker, scented with the faint myrrh of his presence and the musty perfume of forgotten pages, yellowed and brittle as autumn leaves. "Folly, perhaps," he admitted, sinking into the armchair opposite, his posture unyielding yet weary, the weight of a millennium's guilt bowing his shoulders. Born amid Bohemia's carnage, he had watched his wife's breath falter in the plague's grip, his children's eyes dim under the executioner's blade, a betrayal that turned him from man to monster, ethical guardian of a shadowed realm. Solitude had been his penance, enforcing truces with mortals while his heart calcified, yearning for a connection that might absolve the lives he could not save. But denial is a slower death. The prophecy binds us not through fate, but through choice. I marked you to claim agency over the ruin it foretells. She accepted the goblet, the crystal cool against her lips, the blood's texture silky and vital, warming her from within like sunlight on snow. It eased the ache in her veins, but not the dilemma clawing at her mind. The rain pattered against the windows, a melancholic lullaby underscoring their words, while candle flames guttered, sending rivulets of wax down the iron holders like tears frozen in time. Elara leaned forward, the locket swinging like a pendulum between them. "Choice," she whispered, her breath stirring the air. "Mine has always been survival, stealing sips in the night, fleeing torches and whispers. Yours is a throne built on blood oaths. What if our paths entwine not in light, but in the war you dread? Draven's blade was but the first. The clans will see me as the wedge that splits your kingdom." Victor's eyes darkened, amber depths reflecting the library's gloom, where shadows pooled like spilled ink around the base of shelves, groaning with tomes of arcane lore, histories of fallen realms, prophecies etched in silver thread. He reached across the space, his fingers brushing hers, not in possession, but in shared vulnerability, the contact sending a shiver through her, textured like silk tearing. "Then we face it together," he said, his voice threading compassion through the somber timbre. "Redemption is not found in isolation, Elara. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Yet in choosing life with you, half-mortal flame to my endless night, I glimpse the mercy I have long denied myself." Guilt flickered in his gaze, the scar on his palm a pale reminder of vows broken, but beneath it burned a solitary fire, ethical and unyielding, seeking absolution in her fractured light. The moment stretched, introspective and charged, the library a cocoon of flickering gold and encroaching dark. Alara felt the mark pulse in response, a ritual revelation unfolding in her mind. Visions of ruined gardens under moonlight, battles where loyalty bled into betrayal, a love that redeemed through suffering, transforming curse into choice. Death hovered at the edges, invisible yet palpable, its chill breath rustling the pages of an open book nearby, as if eager for the kingdom's unraveling. She withdrew her hand, the goblet trembling in her grip, rationalizing the warmth blooming in her chest as mere illusion. Yet resistance crumbled, inevitable as the rain's descent. "If love is our blade," she murmured, "then let it cut true. I stay, not for prophecy, but for the soul you see in my shadows." Victor's expression softened, a rare vulnerability cracking his regal mask. But before he could speak, a distant clamor echoed through the corridors, boots on stone, urgent whispers rising like smoke. A messenger burst into the library, his face ashen, robes askew. "My lord," he gasped, breath ragged, "Draven has escaped his bonds. Forces gather in the lower halls. House Morvath rallies the dissidents. They march on the throne room, crying treason born of the Dhampir's mark." The goblet slipped from their hands, shattering on the rug in a spray of crimson shards, the sound sharp as breaking oaths. Alara's heart seized, the locket burning against her skin like a brand of impending doom. Victor's hand found hers again, firm now, a vow forged in the gathering storm. But in her eyes, doubt flickered. Had she chosen redemption or ignited the war that would consume them both? The rain lashed harder, thunder rolling like the kingdom's death knell as shadows lengthened toward an uncertain dawn. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The library's shadows deepened as the messenger's words hung in the air like a shroud. The shattered goblets bleeding crimson into the Persian rug, their jagged edges catching the candlelight in fractured glints. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, a mortal drumbeat clashing against the citadel's stony silence, while Victor's grip on her hand tightened, not in fear, but in the unyielding resolve of one who had stared down oblivion 1,000 times. The rose locket at her throat seemed to constrict, its petals etched with the weight of choices already made, now spiraling toward catastrophe. Rain hammered the lancet windows with renewed fury, sheets of it blurring the outside world into an indistinct veil, as if the heavens themselves mourned the kingdom's fraying seams. Victor released her, rising with a fluid grace that belied the storm brewing in his amber eyes. "Summon the loyalists," he commanded the messenger, his voice a low rumble that resonated off the shelves, stirring dust from the ancient tomes like ghosts roused from slumber. "Bar the lower gates and prepare the throne room. We meet this treason head-on." The young immortal bowed hastily, his robes whispering as he vanished into the corridor, leaving behind the echo of hurried footsteps fading into the labyrinthine depths. Victor turned to Alara, his scarred palm still warm from their contact, the mark on her own hand pulsing in sync, a ritual echo that bound them, intimate and inescapable, like veins threading through shared flesh. "You should retreat to the upper spires," he said, the words laced with a protectiveness that bordered on desperation, his gaze tracing the pallor of her face, the faint tremor in her lips. Guilt shadowed his features, the eternal king's solitude cracking under the pressure of what he had unleashed, a mark meant to defy prophecy, now the banner under which dissidents marched. Born in Bohemia's war-torn cradle, he had forged this realm from the ashes of betrayal, enforcing ethics amid the clan's savagery. No innocents turned, no needless wars waged, yet here, in her half-mortal presence, his resolve wavered. She was the light he had not sought, a Dhampir's fragile warmth piercing the ice of his isolation, stirring desires long buried under layers of command and remorse. Ilara shook her head, standing to meet him, the velvet chaise creaking softly beneath her. The air in the library thickened with the scent of spilled blood and smoldering wax, the candles guttering as a draught slithered through the cracks, carrying the distant clamor of mobilization. Clinking armor, muffled orders, the low growl of fangs bared in anticipation. Retreat? And abandon the choice I just claimed. Her voice emerged steady, threaded with the disillusionment that had shadowed her wanderings. Orphaned in the Carpathian mists, cast out at 16 when her fangs pierced the night, surviving on pilfered vials and fleeting illusions of connection. Lovers had fled her touch, healers decried her as demon spawn, leaving her soul scarred like the locket's rose, beautiful yet thorned. But Victor's mark had ignited something profound, a belonging resisted at first as sorcery, rationalized as survival's ploy, yet now inevitable, blooming like forbidden nightshade in her veins. If our bond dooms this place, let me stand witness, not as thrall, but as equal in the shadows. He studied her, the space between them charged with unspoken tension, the rain's rhythm a somber counterpoint to their breaths, hers quick and alive, his measured and eternal. The library's gloom enveloped them, moonlight filtering through the panes in silver shafts that illuminated the faint scar on his palm, a mirror to her hidden wounds. Equality in eternity is a cruel jest, Victor murmured, stepping closer. His coat's black velvet brushing her cloak with a whisper of texture, cool and enveloping. I have watched kingdoms fall for less than this, love's whisper turning to war's roar. Yet in your eyes I see the redemption I forfeited centuries ago, a chance to choose not isolation, but transformation. His fingers grazed the locket, not claiming it, but acknowledging its symbolism, the fragile bloom defying decay, much like her half-life defying the clan's purity. A revelation stirred then, intimate and unbidden, as the mark warmed between them. Visions of moonlit battlements where they fought side by side, her blood mingling with his in a ritual of mutual salvation, choices forging a new path through suffering's forge. Death lingered at the periphery, its invisible form a chill mist coiling around the shelves, eager for the spill of immortal ichor and mortal frailty. Ilara leaned into the moment, her stormy gray eyes locking with his, the pull undeniable now, a sensual undercurrent weaving through the tragedy, sensual not in flesh, but in the raw vulnerability of souls laid bare. Then let us transform the prophecy, she whispered, her breath stirring the air between them, textured like silk unfurling in the dark. Not destruction, but rebirth. For if love is curse and redemption entwined, I choose the thorns. Victor's expression softened, a flicker of profound ache crossing his regal mask, but the corridor's clamor swelled, boots thundering now, voices rising in a cacophony of allegiance and defiance. He nodded once, a vow sealed in the library's hush, and together they moved toward the door, her hand finding his in the gloom, the mingled blood from earlier drying into a faint, indelible stain. The citadel's halls unfolded before them, torches sputtering in iron sconces, casting wavering pools of gold on walls veined with quartz like frozen lightning. Guards flanked them as they descended spiral stairs, the air growing heavier with the metallic tang of drawn steel and the ozone bite of gathering storm, both without and within. The throne room loomed at the passage's end, its massive oak doors ajar, revealing a sea of shadowed figures, loyal clans in crimson sashes, their faces taut masks of immortality, weapons glinting under the vaulted ceiling's chandeliers. Draven's forces had breached the lower barriers, a wedge of House Morvath rebels surging through the grand archway, their leader at the fore. Draven himself, unbound and feral, his plum robes torn, eyes blazing with the zeal of betrayal. "The king consorts with abomination!" he bellowed, his voice echoing like cracking thunder, fangs extended in a snarl that reverberated through the marble pillars. The oracle's doom walks among us. End it now, before the kingdom bleeds. Chaos erupted in a symphony of violence, blades clashing with resonant clangs, bodies blurring in predatory dances, the air alive with the rip of velvet and the wet thud of flesh yielding to fang. Elara drew a concealed dagger from her boot, silver-edged, a relic from her wandering days, its hilt worn smooth by desperate grips. Victor surged forward, a whirlwind of elegant fury, his sword singing through the air as he felled a rebel with a precise strike, dark ichor spraying across the tapestries in abstract arcs. She fought at his side, her movements a blend of mortal agility and Dhampir instinct, parrying a blow that whistled toward her throat, the impact jarring her bones like thunder in her veins. The battle swirled around them, introspective pauses amid the frenzy, Elara glimpsing Victor's profile, etched with the guilt of lives he could not spare, his ethical code fracturing under necessity's blade. Rain lashed through the open battlements, mingling with the coppery mist of blood, the floor slick and treacherous underfoot. She drove her dagger into an assailant's shoulder, twisting with a grimace, the texture of resistance yielding to warmth, spilling over her hand. But Draven broke through the melee, lunging at Victor with venomous speed, his blade aimed for the king's heart. Elara intercepted, shoving Victor aside, the rebel's steel grazing her arm in a searing line that bloomed red against her pale skin. Pain flared, sharp and grounding, her blood, vital, half-human, dripping onto the stone in defiant patters. Victor roared, dispatching Draven with a fatal thrust, the body crumpling in a heap of silk and final stillness. The rebels faltered, the tide turning as loyalists pressed the advantage, shouts of victory mingling with the storm's howl. Yet as the fray subsided, Elara staggered, clutching her wound, the mark on her palm igniting in protest, a burning query amid the carnage. Victor's arms caught her, his touch a cool anchor, but in his eyes she saw the fracture deepen. The war had only begun, alliances shattered beyond repair. Whispers rose from the survivors, accusations that her intervention had escalated the doom, that the Dhampir's blood now stained the throne. Had she saved him or sealed their fates in a ritual of irreversible choice? The locket pulsed against her chest, its rose a thorn in her heart as thunder cracked overhead, heralding shadows yet to unfold. The throne room reeked of iron and ruin, the air thick with the acrid tang of spilled ichor and the wet earth scent of rain seeping through the breached battlements. Bodies lay strewn like discarded marionettes across the marble expanse, velvet robes torn and sodden, their pale faces frozen in eternal grimaces. Immortals felled not by sunlight, but by the blade of betrayal. Elara slumped against Victor's chest, her wounded arm cradled in the crook of his elbow, the gash a fiery seam that wept crimson in rhythmic pulses, staining his black coat with the vivid proof of her half-mortality. The rose locket dangled precariously from its chain, swaying with each labored breath, its etched petals slick with sweat and blood, a fragile emblem mocking the chaos it had witnessed. Pain radiated through her like splintered glass, grounding her in the fragility she both cursed and cherished, while the mark on her palm hummed a counterpoint, a warm, insistent throb that linked her to him, weaving their fates tighter than any prophecy's thread. Victor half-carried her through the fray's remnants, his steps measured yet urgent, the loyalists forming a phalanx around them, their swords still drawn, eyes scanning the shadows for lingering threats. The chandeliers overhead swung gently from the storm's fury, casting erratic pools of golden light that danced over the carnage, illuminating the tapestries now rent and bloodied, their embroidered battles mirroring the one just waged. Thunder grumbled low, a distant echo of the kingdom's fracturing heart, as wind howled through the open arches, carrying the chill bite of mountain fog laced with petrichor. "Hold to me," Victor murmured, his voice a silken anchor amid the din, cool lips brushing her temple in a gesture both tender and tormented. Guilt etched deeper lines into his features, the amber of his eyes dimmed by the weight of what her intervention had cost. Draven's death at his hand, a necessary mercy that would ignite further vendettas, alliances splintering like the goblets in the library. He had built this realm on ethical restraint, forbidding the turning of the innocent, brokering peace with mortal borders, yet now, in protecting her, he had unleashed the very war his solitude had sought to avert. They retreated to his private sanctum, a chamber high in the citadel's spire, its walls paneled in dark walnut veined with silver, lit by a single candelabrum whose flames flickered like hesitant confessions. The door sealed behind them with a resonant thud, muffling the outer clamor, the barked orders of guards, the low moans of the wounded, the insidious whispers of survivors plotting in the gloom. Victor eased Alara onto a canopied bed draped in ebon silk, the fabric cool and yielding against her fevered skin, its texture a whisper of luxury amid the encroaching dread. He knelt before her, drawing a basin of warmed water and linens from a concealed alcove, his movements precise, almost reverent, as if tending a sacred relic rather than a Dhampir's frailty. The air grew intimate, scented with the faint lavender of healing herbs he crushed between his fingers, mingling with the metallic bloom of her blood that still dripped in lazy rivulets down her arm. "Why?" she whispered, wincing as he cleaned the wound, the cloth's gentle pressure sending sparks of agony through her nerves, textured like thorns piercing velvet. Her stormy gray eyes searched his, the disillusionment of her life rising like bile. The Carpathian village's torches, the lover's recoils, the endless wanderings where survival meant hiding her pulse, her fangs, her aching need for a place unmarred by rejection. She had rationalized this journey to the citadel as a quest for truth, resisted the pull of his gaze as mere illusion born of isolation. But now, with his blood singing in her veins, inevitability settled like snow on barren ground. "I stepped between you and the blade, not for glory, but because denial would hollow me further. Yet in saving you, have I not hastened the doom the oracle foretold?" Victor's hands stilled, the linen stained russet in his grasp, his scarred palm brushing hers in a fleeting touch that reignited the mark's warmth, a ritual pulse, profound and probing, as if their mingled essence sought answers in the silence. He rose slightly, perching on the bed's edge, the mattress dipping under his weight, the silk pooling around them like spilled night. Outside, rain lashed the arched windows in relentless sheets, blurring the moon's pale disk into a ghostly halo, while distant shouts filtered through the stone, a somber dirge for the kingdom's unraveling. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he said, his timbre low and resonant, weaving philosophy through the chamber's hush like smoke from the guttering candles. "I chose eternity in the shadow of loss, my wife's final gasp in Bohemia's plague-ridden fields, my children's cries silenced by the executioner's steel. Guilt has been my companion since, a solitary vigil enforcing mercy where none was shown me. Marking you was my defiance, not folly, but a bid for redemption through connection. Your choice tonight, it mirrors mine. Love does not destroy alone, it transforms, even if through suffering's forge." Alara's breath caught, the words stirring a revelation deep within, a moment of crystalline choice unfolding in the sanctum's dim glow. The mark flared brighter, visions cascading unbidden, shared vigils in ruined cloisters, battles where their bond forged unlikely alliances. A love that redeemed the damned by embracing the mortal spark she carried. She cupped his face, her uninjured hand tracing the cool marble of his cheek, the texture smooth yet etched with centuries' subtle lines, her touch a bridge between her warmth and his endless chill. Death hovered at the room's edges, invisible as the fog beyond the panes. Its presence a subtle draft, rustling the bed's canopy, whispering temptations of severance, of fleeing now, before the clan's full wrath descended. But resistance shattered. The pull was inevitable, sensual in its profundity, a dance of souls entwined without vulgarity, raw and redemptive. "Then let this wound be our vow," she murmured, her voice threaded with tragic resolve, eyes locking in mutual vulnerability. "I choose eternity's shadow with you, not as thrall, but as the light that pierces your guilt. If our love births war, we will wield it as redemption, turning curse to rebirth." Victor leaned into her palm, a rare tremor betraying his composure, the amber of his eyes softening to molten gold, reflecting the candle's flame like captured sunsets he could never reclaim. He bound her arm with fresh linen, his fingers lingering, the ritual complete in its intimacy, a sealing of choices amid the storm's symphony. The locket rested between them, its rose blooming warmer against her skin, symbol of fragility enduring. For a breath, the world narrowed to this. Two fractured beings, oscillating between light and shadow, life and endless night, their bond a philosophical anchor against the abyss. Yet the sanctum's peace fractured as a frantic knock echoed, the door bursting open to reveal a loyalist scout, his face gaunt, robes muddied by the downpour. "My lord!" he gasped, breath ragged, water pooling at his feet like tears of the forsaken. The outer clans rally. House Morvath's remnants flee to the border holds, summoning ancient pacts with rogue immortals from the eastern wastes. They cry for your abdication, claiming the Dhampir's blood has poisoned the throne. Spies whisper of a greater assault at dawn. The kingdom teeters on oblivion's edge. Victor's hand tightened on hers, the mark searing as if in warning, while Ilara's heart stuttered, a mortal echo of dread. Had their vow ignited salvation, or merely delayed the prophecy's blade? The rain intensified, thunder cracking like a kingdom's breaking spine, as shadows crept longer across the walls, pregnant with the ethical precipice ahead, to fight for a love that might unmake all, or yield to the merciful dark. In that suspended silence, Ilara wondered if redemption could truly resurrect the damned, or if their choice had only invited a deeper fall. The sanctum's air grew taut as the scout's words dissolved into the storm's relentless cadence, rain sluicing down the arched windows like tears from a grieving sky, blurring the jagged silhouette of the mountains into a watercolor of despair. Ilara's wound pulsed beneath the linen binding, a rhythmic ache that mirrored the kingdom's faltering heartbeat, her blood's warmth seeping through the fabric in faint, defiant stains. Victor's grip on her hand lingered, the mark between their palms a living conduit, its heat threading through her veins like roots seeking soil in barren stone. The rose locket nestled against her chest, its petals now slick with the residue of battle and vulnerability, a symbol etched deeper into her soul than any blade could carve. She met his gaze, stormy gray, swirling with the disillusionment of her fractured life, the Carpathian exile, the lover's flight from her shadowed touch, the endless hunger that had hollowed her until this bond, resisted as folly, now bloomed inevitable as midnight's embrace. Victor released her slowly, rising to pace the chamber's confines, his black velvet coat whispering against the walnut panels, each step echoing the ethical precipice he had long navigated alone. The candelabram's flames bowed to an unseen draft, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the ebon silk drapes, while the distant clamors swelled, torches hissing in the corridors, the low growl of assembling forces like thunder gathering in the citadel's bowels. Guilt shadowed his amber eyes, a millennium's weight pressing upon him, the Bohemian fields where plague had stolen his wife's breath, the executioner's swing that silenced his children's laughter, turning a mortal's vow into an immortal's solitary throne. He had enforced mercy in a realm of shadows, forbidding the turning of the pure-hearted, weaving truces with human enclaves fragile as spider silk. Yet her presence unraveled it all, a Dhampir's light igniting the very war his ethics had sought to bury. Abdication, he murmured, the word tasting of ash on his tongue, resonant in the hush. They demand it as if a crown could contain the stars' decree. But yielding would betray not just the clans, but the redemption we glimpsed here, in this fragile now. Alara pushed herself upright, the bed silk slithering like a sigh, pain lancing through her arm, but sharpening her resolve. The air thickened with the scent of lavender and iron, herbs mingling with her blood's coppery tang, a sensory veil that grounded her in the intimacy of their shared peril. She stood, closing the distance between them, her uninjured hand tracing the scar on his palm, a mirror to her own hidden fractures, the touch electric, textured like frost, yielding to flame. Redemption without cost is illusion, she said, her voice a soft counterpoint to the storm's roar, laced with the ache of her half-life's wanderings. Survival had been her creed, pilfered vials in moonlit alleys, illusions of humanity shattered by recoiling embraces. Yet in his gaze, she found not pity, but recognition. A king's solitude echoing her exile, his guilt a companion to her disillusionment. The pull had been rationalized as the mark's sorcery, resisted as a wanderer's trap, but now it surged inevitable, a sensual undercurrent of souls entwining, profound and unyielding. If our love is the poison they claim, let it be the antidote to your isolation. I choose this, not eternity's chill, but the warmth of standing with you, thorns and all. A revelation unfurled then, intimate as a whispered vow in the sanctum's glow, the mark ignited fully, visions cascading like shattered crystal, ruined battlements under auroral skies, clans kneeling not in defeat, but alliance, a love that transformed prophecy's curse into rebirth's forge. Victor drew her close, his cool forehead resting against hers, breaths mingling in the charged space, hers alive and fleeting, his eternal and measured. Death coiled at the chamber's edges, invisible as the fog beyond the panes, its chill rustling the canopy like a lover's sigh turned to warning, tempting severance before dawn's assault. But choice crystallized in that moment, a ritual of mutual surrender. He pressed his lips to the locket's rose, sealing it with a drop of his ichor, the dark essence absorbing into the silver, binding her fragility to his endless night. Then we face the dawn as one, he breathed, his timbre weaving compassion through the somber air, amber eyes alight with the fire of absolution. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Now I choose life through you, half-mortal spark to my shadowed throne. The door shuddered under urgent fists, loyalists spilling in with reports that fractured the sanctum's cocoon. House Morvath's remnants had breached the outer wards, rogue immortals from the eastern wastes swelling their ranks, a tide of velvet and venom converging on the citadel's heart. Victor donned his sword belt with deliberate grace, the leather creaking softly, while Alara retrieved her dagger, its silver edge catching the candle's flicker like captured moonlight. They descended the spiral stairs together, hand in hand, the mark pulsing as a beacon amid the labyrinth's gloom, torches sputtering in sconces, walls echoing with the tramp of boots and the metallic rasp of drawn steel. The throne room awaited, transformed into a bastion. Barricades of ancient oak and iron, archers perched on galleries, their bows strung taut as nerves. The air hummed with tension, scented with oiled leather and the ozone bite of impending storm, rain sheeting through the battlements in gray veils that blurred friend from foe. Draven's successors led the charge at first light, a phalanx bursting through the grand archway in a blur of fangs and fury, banners of silver thorns whipping in the wind. Chaos reignited. Blades singing through the air with resonant clashes, ichor spraying in viscous arcs that sizzled on the stone, the thunderous din mingling with the storm's howl. Victor fought like a tempest incarnate, his sword a extension of will, felling assailants with ethical precision, disabling where possible, merciful in lethality. his coat tearing under glancing blows that knit almost as swiftly as they opened. Elara moved at his flank, her Dhampir agility a dance of shadow and strike, dagger flashing to parry a rebel's thrust, the impact jarring her wounded arm into fresh fire. Blood, hers and theirs, slicked the marble, textured like spilled wine underfoot, while the rose locket swung wildly, its warmth a talisman against the fray. In the melee's heart, a rival lord, Draven's brother, gaunt and vengeful, lunged at Victor, blade poisoned with nightshade essence, aimed to unmake the king eternally. Elara intercepted once more, her body a shield, the toxin grazing her side in a searing bloom that buckled her knees. Pain exploded, vision blurring to crimson haze. But Victor dispatched the foe with a roar that shook the pillars, cradling her amid the turning tide. Loyalists surged, rebels faltering as dawn's pale light pierced the clouds, illuminating the throne room's ruin, bodies heaped like autumn leaves, tapestries rent and bloodied, the air heavy with the coppery mist of survival. As the last echoes of battle faded, Elara leaned into Victor's embrace, her breaths ragged, the poison's chill creeping through her veins like death's insidious whisper. He bore her to the throne, its petrified oak unyielding beneath them, his hands working antidotes from hidden vials, herbs crushed into a bitter paste that he pressed to her wounds, the ritual intimate, desperate. The mark flared in response, drawing the toxin's edge from her blood into his own, a shared burden that left him weakened, amber eyes dimming with the strain. Clans gathered warily, whispers of awe rippling through the survivors. The Dhampir had saved the king, her half-life a bridge turning war's curse to redemption's light. Yet as the sun climbed, gilding the spires in reluctant gold, Elara's gaze met Victor's, a profound dilemma etching their features. The kingdom endured, fractures mended in the heat of their bond, but the oracle's shadow lingered. Love's redemption come at the cost of eternal vigilance. Wars quelled only to simmer anew. Had they transcended the prophecy, or merely postponed its blade? The rose locket rested warm between them, petals aglow, whispering of choices forged in suffering, as the citadel breathed once more, fragile and transformed. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.